AMU. American Military University is proud to present The Everyday Scholar.
Hello and welcome to our Voices in the Field podcast series, brought to you by the APUS Sports Management Program. My name is Jim Reese, and along with my marvelous colleague, Dr. Brittany Jacobs, we'll be your co-host for today's program. Good morning, Britt.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
Doing great. We're excited to introduce our guest today, Miss Kellie Cavalier, VP of Pro Ops and Events at League One Volleyball. Hello, Kellie.
Hi there. Good morning.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today.
Happy to be here.
Britt and I had a chance to review your website. It is, I have to say, the video banners it's one of the best I've ever seen. I don't know who does your website, but tell them they're doing a fantastic job because it looks great.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, we aim to be a little bit different at Love, or League One Volleyball, pronounced Love. And we are really interested in not emulating sort of the masculinity necessarily that exists in a majority of sort of the sports sphere. And so we're sort of not afraid to be pink and colorful and just really embrace who we are and the growth of women's sport.
It really captures your attention, so it's fantastic. Would you please give us a little background about your career path and how you got started in sports? That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up playing sports most of my life, but it wasn't until high school that I realized that there was sort of a place in it for me. And when I was in high school, I participated in something called the World Scholar Athlete Games. And this was a joining of 1,200 to 1,400 young people from over 100 countries. And we all came together to participate in our specific sport or art specialty. At that point, I played soccer. So I played soccer there. And we had this opportunity. It was sort of like a young leaders program as well. You had the competition and you had so much education and important and valuable speakers talking about critical subjects of that day and how we as young people were already leaders and how we could take sort of our strength and our power forward into the lives that we were going to develop. And something that I learned in this event really was the power of sport to bring people together. And, you know, there's a particular example from this experience, which was young people on two sides of a very old global conflict, which we see again happening today in our society. But these young people who are divided by ideology, by war, by global geopolitical impacts, they were able to come together and they specifically said, like, we always thought that the person on the other side of this border was terrible, right? Like that's what the propaganda told us. That's what the world around us said. We are enemies. But here we have this opportunity to meet each other and build a relationship. And it's the sport that brought them together. And they pledged that they would go back to their communities with this newfound knowledge built through sport to work to build a better, less conflict-filled future. I wonder these days, 20 plus years later, how they still feel about that because this conflict continues and is perhaps at its highest, most terrible point at this particular moment. You know, that was really sort of the push for me to see sport as something that could really impact people more than just a game. When I went to college, I studied international relations with this idea that I might join the U.S. Foreign Service and bring the idea of sport into our diplomacy as a nation. I learned in college that when you represent the United States as a member of the Foreign Service, you are representing all of what the current administration is that's important to them, that their policies exist. And I determined that actually I was not able to do that. I couldn't faithfully sort of put myself out there. And so I was looking for a different path, still in sport. And that's how I ended up in sort of the field of sport management and administering sport at various different levels. So that's sort of the background. And then just a little bit about how my career has progressed. I started in my sports career at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C., at a time of a lot of change for that building, as baseball had just come back to Washington, D.C., and then had been at RFK for a couple of years. DC United was playing in there. There was no no longer any NFL team. And so the stadium and the campus had, a lot of change and even will continue to change going forward. But it was an interesting time to be there as we did a lot of different kinds of events to activate the campus. And that's really where I began learning about all the different parts of sort of what sport event and sport business could involve. I learned about groundskeeping, I learned about purchasing, I learned about timekeeping, I learned about event operations, I learned about the legal process, I learned about contracting with event promoters. So really a wide variety of things that I was able to grow a pretty robust skill set there. And while I was in that role professionally, I had a volunteer role with the national governing body, USA Rugby, where I was the manager of the National Women's Rugby Sevens team, which took me, I actually was being able to put some of that into practice in my volunteer role. And I got to travel to many places around the globe supporting and helping this team work to win their competitions. So that was a pretty cool time period where I was doing two things, one very physical based at RFK Stadium and one very travel based, but more on the sort of competition side. I proceeded to go to grad school and did a dual degree program where I achieved a master's at State University of New York, Cortland, and at London Metropolitan University. I did coursework in both locations and had the opportunity to work in VVIP hospitality for the London 2012 Summer Olympic Games, which I learned that VVIP hospitality is not my favorite part of the sports world, but I had a really incredible experience because when you're there in that role, you have the opportunity to see so many different sporting events. And so that was really incredible. After grad school, I returned to the United States to a full-time role at USA Rugby, where over a period of 6 years, I grew from sort of the junior person in the department to lead the department of all of the events that we hosted in the U.S., all of the national team games, supporting international tournaments in the U.S. We hosted the first ever North American and Caribbean Olympic qualifier because the Rugby Sevens joined the Olympics in 2016 in Rio. And so that was a really cool time of growth for that organization. And it began the next sort of phase of my career, which has been, over the last 10 years, predominantly in new business, growth business, and startups, really, unique things, taking them from ideas into action. I have currently at League One Volleyball, as our listeners know, but I've worked for a couple of different sports league startups and really excited to be at League One Volleyball right now because obviously this moment is an incredible moment. It's not a moment, it's a movement for, women sport. And it's really exciting to be in this space. And particularly what's interesting about the sport of volleyball is that there isn't a parallel men's league in the United States, whereas the WNBA, the PWHL, NWSL, these leagues have long time existing men's leagues that they're constantly being measured against, whether that's the right ruler or not. They are constantly being measured against. And in volleyball, we have this opportunity to bring sort of the most incredible expression of the sport, which is women's volleyball in the United States, to the forefront. And so that's just a really incredible place to be right now.
Oh my gosh, you touched on so many things in there that Britt and we talk about all the time. Sometimes you have to do something to realize you don't want to do it. But it's not a waste of time because you narrow your focus on where you'd like to go with your career. That was a lot to unpack, but that's awesome. Thank you for that introduction. Wonderful.
Kellie, one of the things you mentioned talking about your job at RFK, and I'm sure at your current roles, you have so many responsibilities in events, from contracting to managing the grounds to working with personnel. How do you become an expert in all of those areas in order to do your job well?
That's a great question. I think that it's a lot of on-the-job learning, to be perfectly honest. You can read textbooks and you can understand the theory behind business and management and all of that. But honestly, I think I've built most of my skill set from on-the-job learning, like having mentors that are willing to show you the ropes and understand that you're not going to know anything necessarily when you start, and that to help you build your skill set. And I think as well, the innate desire to figure it out is also really helpful. Identifying what you know and then identifying what you don't know. I think those are two really key things. And then finding the folks that can help you understand the parts that you don't know. In my career, it's also been really interesting. There are so many things that at the outset, I had no idea that I would become, I don't want to say an expert, but knowledgeable in. And sometimes it's enough knowledge to just get to the next point and you continue building. One that I like to talk about is broadcast, television broadcast. I never anticipated going into event operations that I would just even be really engaged and involved with broadcast. But now I have a great amount of knowledge. Do not ask me to stand behind a camera. I will not do a great job there. But, in the sense that I know what I need to ask of the various folks that are involved. I know how to get the things I need from a venue or a vendor to be successful. And I think that's a key piece, is that you learn and you develop. And actually, it's fun because there's so many things that you don't know that you get to learn about over time.
Thank you. That hands-on training is so important. And Jim and I try to stress to our students all the time, just get out there and volunteer, just try it. And you'll potentially find someone, like you mentioned, a good mentor that'll help you along the way.
It's the students that show that ambition to, I guess, embrace responsibility and not just, hang out on their phones after they're, they say, they finish a task and, hey, Kelly, what else you got for me? I finished that. And that's the kind of, initiative that people are looking for. Is there anything else, since you've been through that, is there anything else that you look for, when you're mentoring younger people? Is any other skills like that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think what you're saying there about just sort of having just a bit of foresight and gumption, I'd much rather work with someone that has zero knowledge, but a very open sense of willing to try it, willing to do it, looking for work. That is an incredible thing that is really difficult to teach. And so, when I've had interns or early stage career folks in my vicinity, I think that's what I'm looking for when I have the opportunity to hire someone like that. And recently at Love, that's exactly what we did. There was a young woman who had been in contract roles recently out of college, had a great knowledge of the sport, but really no knowledge yet of how operations worked. And we brought her on full time because it was so clear that even though she had a lot to learn, she said, yes, she looked for work. She said, oh, here's this idea. Let's do this. And that's where you get to grow and you can cultivate sort of that knowledge that I was mentioning before that you never really know that you're going to get. You just don't know all of the areas. It's not possible when you're new to the field. So I think that to me is the number one most important thing. And then we can teach everything else.
No, absolutely. And we had Britt and I had a student that volunteered at the Live tournament a few weeks ago in DC, and he drove in from Kentucky for the weekend just to work the event. So we knew he was going to do a good job just because of that. So, this is I hope our students, will take these things to heart from the standpoint of, the approach that they work when they go to try to build their resume and break into the industry.
How is it working for a startup in comparison to a more established league, something like USA Rugby or working for RFK like you did previously?
I think something about a startup is that most people come to it with a passion, especially in sport, right? Maybe in other fields like tech, there's a different reason that people go to startups, but in sport, there's typically a real passion that someone brings to the project. And that's an incredible thing. It's energy and enthusiasm and dedication to the mission of the organization. And at League One Volleyball, this is the case, in sort of more front-facing roles where my team, where we're out there working with venues and producing game days, but also in our sort of back office roles, like folks that are in our HR team, in our finance team, in our legal team. All of those folks are here because they bring a skill set, but they're also super connected to the mission. And so the one value there, I think, is that when the going gets tough, you get to fall back on the purpose that you have, specifically like your why for being there.
Britt, that's a great question. And to follow up, well, also, Kelly, it's really nice in a startup to be able to put your fingerprint on something too, and to say, you know what, I had an opportunity to contribute to the growth of the organization. Speaking of that, it looks like about 6 months in now. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, so League One Volleyball, overall, we're 5 years old. The professional league, we have completed our first season. So yeah, it's about 8 months since our athletes first reported. So yeah, 1 season in.
It looks like you're growing. I saw a banner about, 75 junior clubs. Tell us a little bit about that and how that contributes to the professional side.
Yeah, definitely. We are a really unique organization. And in particular, our founders from the beginning had this idea that volleyball is for everyone in all stages of life. And there's this huge junior volleyball community across the United States. And actually, that's where they started building an ecosystem of junior volleyball clubs. And Love comes in and acquires them, keeps the local management, but then helps them manage all of the things that's not the volleyball. Like we help them with registration systems. We help them pay their staff. We help them with HR and people success. We help them with finance, all of those kinds of things that allows the folks that started a junior volleyball club to coach, teach, and enjoy the sport of volleyball to actually focus on the volleyball and build a community of them as well so that they can take best practices back and forth. We're 75 clubs strong at this point. I think when I joined Love 2.5 years ago, we were in the 20s. So we've had a really incredible growth. So in the 6 cities where we have pro teams, the professional athletes train in the same facility as the junior volleyball athletes. And so there's a lot of connectivity in the community there. And then obviously, if we have 75 junior volleyball clubs and only 6 pro teams, there are many junior volleyball clubs that don't have a pro team in their city or in their vicinity. And so we work to also bring our pros into those clubs, bring those clubs closer to the pros. And we have NIL athletes as well. So we bring together the youth, the collegiate, and the pro players to try and create this whole community ecosystem. Yeah, and it's pretty great, honestly. And we also want to offer that opportunity, not just to the clubs that are in Love's ecosystem, but to every junior volleyball player, to invite them to come see the highest level of professional volleyball here in the United States and come to our games. So it's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. And, and it's a little more difficult on the athletes, I would think, because, in the NFL or, in the major sports, they don't have any responsibility to help the organization grow. It's pretty much large enough. But with your pro athletes going to the junior teams, I mean, there's a lot of, and you talked about passion, there has to be a lot of passion there to help that organization continue to grow and thrive. And Volley Tots, I love that. That's fantastic. Oh, whoever does your marketing, just bravo. So that's great. I hope it continues to grow and, hopefully add more than, it'd be great to have 12 teams, in a couple more years. That'd be awesome. So
definitely that we have growth on the mind for sure.
Please stay with us. We'll be right back with our special guest, Kellie Cavalier.
In the military, I was part of a unit that had my 6.
When someone has your back, you feel confident and prepared. As students of American Military University, over 60,000 veterans and active military know how important that is.
With a dedicated veteran enrollment team to help me move forward with purpose, providing the right structure to ensure I gain career-relevant industry skills so I can focus on what's ahead.
Now, I'm moving with authority in this next mission without looking back because American Military University has got my 6.
Get started today. Go to amuonline.com/veterans.
Thanks for staying with us. We're back with today's guest, Kellie Cavalier. Now let's get back to the discussion.
Kellie, you mentioned there are 6 teams in 6 cities. How did you decide what those cities are going to be when you were starting this league just a few years ago?
Yeah, that was actually part of my job when I first joined League One Volleyball, was to evaluate the markets across the United States. So we started with 38 markets and we used a lot of different data, including what the landscape looked like for professional sport in the cities, cost of living, sort of your general economic factors. And then we also looked at the participation of junior volleyball in the cities and collegiate volleyball fandom as well, among other factors. And the cities we settled on, as we've discussed, we have this connectivity with junior volleyball. And so we wanted to also make sure that we were connected with junior volleyball in those markets. And two of our markets, Atlanta and Houston, are big markets, right? They're big cities, but we have really large junior volleyball programs in those markets that we're deeply connected to. So those were very obvious markets for us. We, through the spine of the United States, have Madison, Wisconsin, Omaha, Nebraska, and Austin, Texas. And these markets have huge collegiate volleyball success and fandom. Wisconsin, Nebraska, Texas, they, for the past 10 to 15 years, have been, as the growth of volleyball has continued, they've really been at the forefront of success in the collegiate ranks. And our sixth city is Salt Lake, which has a really unique vibe. It's like such a family-focused city. The volleyball there is quite good from a collegiate perspective, with University of Utah and BYU both present there. And there is a huge adult playing population in Utah as well. So really interesting. And as we look to continue our growth, there are other factors now that we have more knowledge of our fan base and whatnot, that we can continue to adjust our metrics for evaluating as we go forward.
It's so interesting when you consider all of the possible cities to imagine narrowing it down to only 6. That must have been a massive challenge.
Well, and our cities are so different as well. We have 2 of the largest markets in the United States with Houston and Atlanta, and then 2 of the smallest cities in Omaha and Madison. And so they're very different. And the way we address them from marketing and sponsorship potential and all of that has to differ as well, because the markets themselves require it.
So how in the world do you get a marketing plan? Or, I mean, it must be really tough do you just have a different goal for each city? And what does your fan base look like? And I mean, I'm sure you mentioned it's not just women, which is great. So.
Yeah, definitely. We are a women forward, which would be expected, in most women's leagues, where more women like us more than the average league, let's say. And this is, we've just had our first season. So we had an idea of what our audience might be before the season. And now we have real data around who our audience has been over the course of the last season. And our in-person fans are multi-generational. We are just over 20% Gen Z, over 30% millennial, and over 25% Gen X in our arenas, which is really interesting and different from other sports leagues. So that's we have this opportunity to bring sort of families, people across the spectrum, as opposed to focusing on sort of sports leagues are focused on the millennials who have whatever the largest growth potential at the moment, and then the younger cohorts coming up and their potential future fandom. So really interesting where we sit in that. And we also found we have a partnership with ESPN, and they were able to get some data on who's watching, obviously. And we've found that our audience skews more female and younger than the average ESPN audience. And so that's really interesting to think about from the perspective of who's watching versus who's in the arena, because anyone can watch. The arenas are in very specific places, and so we can only draw from a certain radius, or, some folks would travel in. And we also have found, because volleyball is very popular across the globe, we do have a lot of international fans that are watching. We obviously are not likely to convert those folks into being ticket buyers, but we have other ways to potentially invite them in further, whether it's merch or, other things that they could be interested in down the road. So I think a pretty broad spectrum in the opportunity for us to grow. As it relates to your question about each market, that is something that is really interesting in a centrally owned and operated league. like League One Volleyball. So we have sort of a centralized brand and marketing team, and then we also have teams in each market. And so they are focused locally on tweaking and adjusting to meet the needs of the market. They would do something different in a big market versus a smaller market. And a lot of it comes down to really getting very ingrained with the community, because those are the folks that will come out, right? You have to build into the fabric of a city, just like we see with, longer standing professional sports leagues. And it takes time, but I think our community relationships are really what begin to drive local fandom.
Kellie, one thing you mentioned is your fans in the actual arenas and then the fans that are watching on broadcasts. From an events perspective, how do you cater to both of them, making it a beautifully broadcast game that looks and feels great, but also when you're in the stadium that it feels awesome if you're there?
We have two different departments that oversee those things, but in operations, it's our responsibility to make sure that all is delivered well. From the broadcast side, we would essentially have an executive producer, and their job is to determine the vision for what we want Love's broadcast to look like. What do we want people to see? What are the angles? What's the data that we want to share with them? They're in charge of the vision, and then we work to execute that in the arena. We think about where the cameras go, what they're catching. We think about how we seat our fans in the building to make it a exciting environment for the TV watchers. And, we just think about operationally, how do we keep it smooth, timeouts and media timeouts and all those kinds of things that allow the broadcast to function smoothly while also making the in-arena fan experience critically enjoyable. It's because it's really important. We also have a fan experience department where essentially they're focused on what folks are experiencing there in the arena, as well as in the lead up to, we look at what's the ticket buying process. What is it like when you park and come in? Do you get in quickly? Are folks frustrated by the bag check process? Have we communicated well enough to them in advance? And also, how do we entertain them when they come in? So I think that's both of those things work together. And volleyball is a really interesting sport for both of these areas because there is no clock and there is no set end. Someone has to win, and they can win in 3 sets, in 4 sets, or in 5 sets. And each set continues until there's a winner. So you can have a game that's maybe an hour and 15 minutes long, or you can have a game that's over 3 hours long, which is a challenge both in the arena and for broadcast. And so volleyball's really interesting in that way.
Awesome. Thank you.
Kellie, from the standpoint of, I want to make sure I word this properly, because I think one of the things that Britt and I are trying to do is, get more women into our program, get them more interested, because it is, I don't know what the numbers are. I think it's about 75% men. But from the perspective of a woman, what advice can you give those students that are coming up that would like to break into sports and maybe into a startup league or something like that? How do they build a resume? How do they meet people so that they go ahead and break into the industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we talked about earlier, this idea of trying things out and seeing what you like and what you don't like, that's a real opportunity to meet people and start building relationships that can help you down the line. I also think that there are networking groups, and honestly, the word networking kind of sucks. It's, it conjures up this idea of standing stiffly, in a room, feeling afraid to go up to somebody because they're more senior than you and they're having a conversation and you're just how do I break into this conversation? I just stand here and smile until someone acknowledges me. That's what, what networking feels like. But there's an opportunity to join groups like WISE, or here in Denver where I live, we have the Denver Women's Sports Collective. And it's an opportunity to, even when you're still a student, to build relationships and learn from other folks. We have fun social events and we go to sporting events, and it's a casual environment that allows you to connect with people. And so I do think that those kinds of things can be really helpful. And you can arrange informational interviews with folks that are in those groups. And folks are joining these groups for their own benefit, but also because they want to contribute to the community that they're a part of. And so I think those are really helpful ways. Additionally, I feel like I benefited personally from a variety of internships. And I also think that you shouldn't work for free. So I am a big advocate of paying interns because their time is valuable and they make good contributions to the companies that they're a part of. But I do think also in the spirit of ruling things in and ruling things out, like internships can really help you understand. And when we're in an academic environment, our skills do not always directly translate, right? The years that we've learned to write papers, that 25-page paper is probably not the way that you need to present information in a business environment. Okay, so then you learn how to write memos and you learn how to have succinct communication, and internships can help you with those, transferring sort of the academic skills to the real world skills as well. I think probably the first piece is that not being afraid to fail. And that's probably not just for women, but for everyone. And I'd like to tell young people that I failed my first job out of college. I was terrible at it. It was not the right fit for me. I think what it taught me is that you don't always have to get it right. Like, it's okay to make that mistake or choose the wrong job or be in a situation that turns out not to be great for you. And then you get to try again. You say, okay, that's not for me. And I go and try again. And that's how I ended up at RFK, right? Like it was the right fit and it made sense. And it gave me a great background in the industry and sort of launched my career. So I think firstly, I would say, don't be afraid to fail, to put yourself in a position where you have to stretch. That's okay. And then I think my other piece of advice is that to speak up, because your voice is as valuable as anyone else's in the room. And everyone else may not always remember that about you. So I think particularly when there are less women, it feels harder to stand up. But I think that's really something to say, that's really valuable in an environment that's more dominated by men, that your voice matters and you can speak up too.
Well, it depends on who you're talking to and where you are, because you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot, but you do need to stand up for yourself. So I think that's some great advice.
Kellie, I've got one more question for you. When you're talking about events and all of these opportunities that are created within that arena kind of space, how many people are working on your team? What do their roles look like? Tell us a little bit about kind of the day-to-day and what that team environment looks like.
Yeah, definitely. We think unique here at League One Volleyball. Unlike the sort of traditional sports franchises that many of your students would be most familiar with, we are operated by the league. So our league owns all of the teams. And so our events and ops department is focused on delivering the game days of every single team across the league. Whereas typically a franchise would really just be focused on delivering their own home games in their own venue. Something that is different about us is that we don't own any of our venues. And so we have this huge job of maintaining incredible relationships with the arenas that we go to. So that's a big part of what we do as an organization. My team is structured sort of in event operations and then the ancillary things. So my event ops team, there's a director, and then we have an event manager for each market, and they're responsible for owning the delivery of event days. And then, that's working with the venue to plan all of the details from how many chairs go on the sideline bench to where does the cooler of ice go? Where does the broadcast camera go? How many doors do we need to open based on our expected attendance for tonight? Do we have the proper security in place? Have we done risk management planning? Do we have the medical support we need? Where do the players enter? There's so many pieces to what makes game day happen behind the scenes, and there's a lot of people that play into that. Beyond the event manager, we have a ton of folks that support us on a contract basis to help us build out our technology, to just be the arms and the legs on event day to help us get things set up and torn down. Every time we come in, we put up all of our signage, we program all of our LED, if we have giveaways, we do all of that work. So all of that is in our team, and it's a big lift. And then we think about sort of the other pieces that we had discussed, the marketing, fan experience, sponsorship activation, broadcast. And we have groups of people focused on each of those areas, and they all have to coordinate with the event ops team, because event ops essentially has to make sure that they are capable of being successful in the venue. And so we spend a lot of time in spreadsheets. Our jobs are very two things. It's very in front of your computer, looking at spreadsheets, and then it's very not in front of your computer, making it happen. So that's just, I think, an interesting dichotomy about events and event ops, is that you have a planning phase and then an action phase, and they are diametrically opposed in the sense of what it's like to do those different things. And you have to be able to like both to work for you to really enjoy working in this space.
Thank you. Yeah, I can only imagine managing all of those pieces in multiple different venues across multiple different cities. It definitely is a big lift, like you said.
All right, Kelly. Now, Britt and I always have one question that we ask at the end, and it's, what's next for Kellie Cavalier?
That's one thing to say also, is that about League One Volleyball, is that we work really hard, and it's also very important that we are humans. And so I think that's something that's really cool about where I am right now. Our season is so busy. There's no days off really in that time period, but we work really hard to balance that. I'm looking forward to some balance at the end of the summer when I head there. In terms of the long-term phase, honestly, it kind of doesn't matter. I'm happy where I'm at right now. We're doing really cool things. We're building something truly unique and impactful. And I'm not looking ahead, because what we're doing right now is so great.
Well, that's awesome. And, you just never know. And you've touched so many different things in your career. You just never know what door could open. It is so important because in our field, it's a small circle, as we always say. And you're, one or two phone calls away from getting to just about anyone. And so not only who you know, but who knows you is important as well. So, Britt, any last questions for Kellie?
No, I don't think I have any left. Thanks for joining us, Kellie. I really appreciate it.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And it was awesome. Thank you.
We really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be with us today. And to our listeners, we really appreciate your continued support of our Voices in the Field podcast series. On behalf of myself, Britt, and all of our colleagues from the APUS Sports Management Program, this is Jim Reese saying so long.
For more information about our university, visit us at amuonline.com. Thank you for listening. AMU, American Military University.